Wow, here we go. The inaugural episode of the Black Eskimo Podcast. I had a couple other options that I was thinking about. I decided that Culture-Vultures would be the way to begin it. I think it's got enough layers to it. So that's where I'm going to start. I think it's a good way to start things. I have to apologize though. I am under the weather. It is winter here in Toronto. I'm actually on the outskirts, a suburb of Toronto. And I do sound a little nasally now, and you'll hear it. It'll be a little more pronounced at certain points within the podcast. I apologize. By Monday, which will be the second episode, I will hopefully sound less nasally and more myself. But definitely tune in. Tune in today, Monday, whenever, always. So culture vulture is definitely something that speaks to one's racial identity. It's something that has really surfaced in a pretty dramatic way last year as it pertains to white individuals, namely involved in the hip-hop space. And so the first person that really surfaced and got branded heavily, we'll say, is Lyor Cohen. Lyor Cohen started off in the mid-'80s as the manager for Run DMC. One of the two MCs in Run DMC is the brother of rap mogul Russell Simmons. So Russell Simmons and Rick Rubin started Def Jam, and obviously Russell Simmons goes back to the days of Kurtis Blow. He managed Kurtis Blow in the late 70s. So he's had a long history with hip-hop music. Lyor Cohen was on The Breakfast Club. I watched The Breakfast Club, the YouTube clips, which are primarily interviews, fairly consistently, at least a few times a week, depending on who's on. Obviously, I watch it really just for the interviews. And then obviously I do not tune into the actual live broadcast, which airs, I think it's 4 hours a day. I think it's like 6 to 10, Monday to Friday. Don't quote me on that. But so Lyor Cohen came on The Breakfast Club. He was interviewed. This was back about 7-8 months ago, going into 2018. And he was branded by Damon Dash. And Damon Dash, very outspoken. Never really been a big fan of Damon Dash or Jay-Z. There have been select songs that I like from Jay-Z. But basically, Damon Dash and Jay-Z, along with another partner, I believe it's Biggs. Don't quote me on that. I don't really follow too heavily. I've seen him being interviewed on The Breakfast Club and other outlets, but the three of them started the label back in the 90s. I first heard about Jay-Z 94, maybe a little earlier, but 94 he was on Big Daddy Kane's album, Daddy's Home. And at that time he was still doing the more rapid style, rhyme style. And then obviously he toned it down and brought it more into just a more accessible, moderate pace in terms of how he delivered his rhymes. Damon Dash spoke out about, or accusing Lyor Cohen causing division between he and Jay-Z. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but the reason why he made that statement is because Roc-a-Fella-Records, which is the label, like I said, that was started by Damon Dash, Jay-Z, and I believe it was Biggs, the third partner. I think it was Priority Records put them out initially, and then they kind of canceled that deal and came over to Def Jam because Def Jam was the label. Russell Simmons and Rick Rubin, major. That was the first official hip hop label as far as like really getting out there in a corporate way. Damon Dash accused Lyor Cohen of really coming in between he and Jay-Z. Not too sure if there's any truth to that, but there might be. It's not impossible. Not only was he speaking out about Lyor Cohen's, or his belief that Lyor Cohen came in between he and Jay-Z, but he had branded Lyor Cohen as a culture vulture. And a culture vulture, from what I hear, and from what Damon Dash has said and others have said within the context of rap culture or black culture in America, is one who is not of the culture, meaning racially you are not from the culture. You are not a member of the culture, racially speaking. And yet you have this dominant role within the culture. Russell Simmons saw that Lyor Cohen's had a capability to work within that space. And not only that, if Lyor Cohen is a culture vulture, then why isn't Rick Rubin a culture vulture? Clearly a white male who started Def Jam and was more of a rock fan than a fan of hip-hop music, but still enjoyed hip-hop music, still recorded songs for Run DMC who were not on Def Jam, but they were under the management of Russell Simmons, his partner. So from the very beginning, a white guy partnered up with Russell Simmons as a black guy and made this major label, really hip-hop's first major label, this signature rap label, hip-hop label coming out of New York City. So
It's a tricky one. I don't know. I think Damon Dash can say what he wants to say. I think it's a really silly argument. You can say that Lear Cohen is all of these things that are negative if you choose to, as being Damon Dash. But the idea, or Dame Dash, for you to now deem him illegitimate because he's white, I don't know, you got to do the same thing with Rick Rubin, because Rick Rubin's white as well. Hip-hop culture in New York really came out of the Black and Latino experience, and even trying to make a separation between those groups is not accurate either, because Latino people, if you check out their lineage, there's an African component to them as well. I mean, they're mixed with other groups, but there is absolutely an African component to Latino people, whether it be Puerto Rican or Dominican people. And they played a prominent role as DJs, as breakers, as MCs, coming up through the culture from the 70s onwards. So I don't know. This whole idea that if you're not Black or Latino, you can't speak on the culture, you can't be a representative within the culture. I don't know. I can't say I completely agree with that. In fact, I don't agree with it. I don't agree with it because, like I said, the very label that Dame Dash and Jay-Z and their partner Biggs signed to, being Def Jam, was founded by a black guy, Russell Simmons, and a white guy, Rick Rubin. So this idea that you can't represent the culture, you can't be within the framework of the culture because you're white, David Nash needs to really rethink that definition because it doesn't really make any sense, truthfully. But more recently, it came out in the form of Michael Rapaport. Michael Rapaport, I first saw him in '94. He was in a movie called Zebrahead, an interracial love story about him dating a black girl and the backlash that surrounded that. And then I saw him later on by '97 in Metro, starring Eddie Murphy, and he was a rookie cop coming into the fold, or a younger cop, we'll say. So I don't know. I basically what happened is highly publicized battle where Meek Mill came out and talked about these reference tracks that Drake had used to make songs, and that they brought his whole this whole idea of him writing or not writing his own music or not writing his own lyrics into question. And then they got into a big battle, a more publicized commercial battle, where Drake came out the victor. So anyway, Rapaport's a very outspoken guy. He is once again a white guy, like Lear Cohen. I believe he was brought up in Manhattan, so he's a New Yorker. And if you're a New Yorker of a certain vintage, I mean, he's like in his late 40s. I think he's probably late 40s, early 50s. He's a white guy, but he's a hip-hop guy. And for the most part, I'm in my late 40s, and I came up with hip-hop. I came up with other things. I came up with funk and R&B and soul and reggae. So I can relate to where Rapaport's coming from. He's a hip-hop dude, grew up in New York. And not just that, I mean, he started off as an actor, and he's still acting. He's gone on to become an author and a sports commentator. He's a big sports fan. From a tweeting standpoint, Meek Mill now questioned Rapaport as a white person and said, who gave you permission to speak on black culture critically? Once again, the whole culture-vulture labeling. How is this white guy speaking about the culture? And it's tricky because, it's not. I keep saying it's not tricky. It's pretty clear cut. You look at someone like Rick Rubin. Rick Rubin was into hip-hop. He was more of a rock guy and still is, but he was into hip-hop going back into the 80s and probably into the 70s. He started Def Jam with Russell Simmons. And then you have Lear Cohen. So Lear Cohen comes on board shortly after the start of Def Jam, works for Rush Productions, which is owned and operated by Russell Simmons, the co-founder of Def Jam. And, he came up through the ranks, dealing with Run DMC and signing various other acts, DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, De La Soul, and countless other artists to this management company, Rush Productions. And then, then we come into Michael Rapaport. Michael Rapaport grew up in New York City during the 70s and 80s. He grew up as a hip-hop fan. He also, it cannot be understated, it's a classic documentary, Beats, Rhymes, and Life, documentary on A Tribe Called Quest. He was a huge Tribe Called Quest fan. Meek Mill can, definitely defend his position from the standpoint of, okay, you don't think I'm a good rapper, you don't think I rhyme on beat, Drake beat me in the battle. It's subjective. I mean, there are people who really do not like Drake, and have singled him out because he's Canadian born. His dad is from, I believe, he's from the American South. I'm not sure where he is from the South exactly. American South. I've lived in the South myself. I lived in Florida. But he's from the South, and I can't recall exactly where or what state he's from. But his mother, a white woman, I don't know where she was born, but she definitely was in Canada when he was born. He was born in Toronto. And there are many people who slam Drake. He's a wimp. He rhymes too soft. He's too emotional. Because obviously hip-hop culture comes out of a more gritty street essence. And so, his fan base goes up to people in their 40s and 50s. Because these days, you're seeing parents of, in their 40s and 50s basically following whatever their kids are listening to. Not all parents, or not all people in their 20s and teens and tweens are necessarily fans of Drake. But his fan base is largely in a younger group. Tweens, teens, 20s. He hasn't been branded as a culture vulture, but he's definitely been seen as less authentic because he's not, on one hand, because he's biracial, and secondly, because he was born in Canada and not America. Even though hip-hop is spread globally, those who are not from America, their legitimacy is questioned. I'm not even going to argue with that. It's just, it's a lot of nonsense because Drake is the most popular rapper in the world. Not even right now, for probably the last 5, if not more years. He's been doing it now for like a decade. But he really hit his stride, I think, by his first official album, which I think was, don't even quote me when that came out because I'm not a Drake fan. But I know he came on the scene in, I believe it was 2009. And now we're in 2019, so it's a decade. But, going back, I can't even recall how long it is, but I know Monie-Love. Monie-Love came on the scene in 1989. She was on a song called Ladies First, which was Queen-Latifah's song. Queen-Latifah's from New Jersey, and that song was a big song. And Monie-Love is Britain. She's British. Did I say she's Britain? She's British. And that's something that was something very different. Even though you see a lot of British artists coming out now, but it wasn't the case back in '89. I don't know if Monie-Love was the first, but she was definitely the first to really make a splash. And I remember she had a show on, I believe it was Hot 97. I believe it was Hot 97. And she was interviewing Atlanta rapper, gangster rapper. That term gangster rapper became reality rapper. But in any event, Young Jeezy was on her program being interviewed because she became a talk personality. She's still a rapper or an MC, but and she goes on these nostalgic tours with people like Special Ed and so on and so forth. But she was interviewing Young Jeezy. I used to call him Young Cheesy. Never been a fan of Young Jeezy. I always thought he was mediocre. At a certain point in the interview, I think she was speaking about the state of the music being hip hop, and he all of a sudden kind of flipped it on her and said, but you're not even American. Aren't you like British? Because now her accent is not as pronounced as it was back in the 80s or 90s because she's been living in America for a long time. I don't know if she's gone back and forth, but I know she's been in America for quite a while. So you're going to diss someone who is a trailblazer as far as female MCs. She's not the first female MC. Female MCs in hip-hop go back to the 70s. But she, alongside people like Queen-Latifah and definitely Michie Me coming out of Toronto, and a host of others, MC like Roxanne Shante, who predates all of them. But, here we have a British MC in the form of Monie-Love, and Monie-Love is dope. I don't know how she sounds now, but back then she was dope. Into the 90s, I remember buying her first album in 91. It wasn't a great album, but, that's neither here nor there because a lot of people don't put out great albums. But she was definitely dope lyrically. And here, Young Jeezy, this mediocre, really crappy rapper out of Atlanta. I'm not a fan of Young Jeezy. I'm not really a big fan of Atlanta hip-hop either, or Atlanta rap. I like Outkast. I liked their earlier stuff, ATLians. I don't mind the Aquemini album. I like Killer Mike. I like Slim Cutter Calhoun. There are some rappers who've come out largely out of the Dungeon family. I like some of Goody Mob stuff. The Dungeon Collective, there's some dope MCs, dope producers who come out of that. Organized Noise. So I give props to Atlanta from that standpoint. That's more of a 90s, early 2s thing. People like T.I. I think T.I. is just all right. Nothing special. But when I look at a Young Jeezy, really not a fan at all of Young Jeezy. I don't know. So the idea that he's questioning Monie-Love, who is a black woman, but she's British born. I don't even know why I'm saying but, because there are no buts here. I think the idea that she's from England is inconsequential. She's dope. Came out 30 years ago. So, this interview with Young Jeezy, I don't know, maybe a decade ago. So maybe 2009, somewhere around there. I don't know. I can't recall exactly when it took place. But I was surprised. I thought, who is this weak rapper being Young Jeezy criticizing Monie-Love and really bringing into question her legitimacy as a hip hop artist or someone speaking on the culture? Like, he was almost trying to brand her like, well, you're an outsider. You're not from America. And I thought it was ridiculous, but I'm not surprised. It's ignorance, it's divisiveness, this idea. Because I'm sure if they're doing it with Drake, well, I've never really encountered it because I've been listening to hip hop for over 30 years, actually almost 40 years now, to be honest with you. Yeah, but I'm not from America. I'm saying but again. There are no buts. I'm not from America, but I grew up on the culture. I grew up listening to hip hop, and I went on to become heavily entrenched in hip-hop culture as a breaker. I wrote for Rap Pages coming out of California. I wrote for Blaze coming out of New York, which was a spin-off for Vibe magazine. So I'm a hip-hop fan. I interviewed dozens and dozens of hip-hop artists. And one thing I got when I interviewed people, they recognized right off the bat that I wasn't just this generic journalist. I was a true bona fide fan. But I'm sure with people like Young Jeezy, I'm sure someone of that mindset in America would say, are you American? Were you born here? If you weren't born here, then you can't speak on it. And it's just a load of rubbish. So you look at a guy like a Young Jeezy questioning Monie-Love as a black woman. You look at people, questioning Drake. I think they give Drake maybe a little less criticism because his dad's American. He was born in Canada, raised in Canada. I'm sure he has a home or two in America where he goes back and forth, but I know he does have a home in Toronto. But being that he does so much business in America, I'm sure he has a home maybe in Miami, maybe in Atlanta. It's separation. It's divisive. It's divisive is the word. It's very divisive in the sense of, well, you're not of this race, or you're not born within this country, so you can't speak on the culture. For me, I think the only qualification should truthfully be, and I don't even know if it's really a qualification. I think anyone can speak on anything they want to speak on. Now, if they come across as ignorant and uninformed, well, then people are allowed to criticize that. But within the context of hip-hop, or I don't really call it hip-hop these days, a lot of it is just more rap, pop rap. Within the context of pop rap, if you are a fan of the music, you can like or dislike the music. You can be critical of the music. Now, whether or not people take you seriously, whether or not you are seen as legitimate, well, people are allowed to speak on that as well. There's a lot of ignorance across the world as it relates to people. I mean, everybody has their opinions, and they're just that, opinions. I'm not really a Lear Cohen fan either. Michael Rapaport, definitely a more likable guy. I think he's funny. I think he's critical, and I'm very critical myself, so I admire that in him. Do I think everything he's saying is correct? No. But I don't think anybody out there is saying all the right things all the time. I really appreciate his contribution to hip-hop. When I look at, Beats, Rhymes, and Life, the documentary he did on Tribe, or A Tribe Called Quest, Meek Mill has not contributed anything worthwhile to hip-hop culture, musically. So when I think about, in terms of contribution between the two, Michael Rapaport being a white guy, Meek Mill being a black guy, I'm sorry, I have to side with Michael Rapaport. Michael Rapaport has contributed something substantial to the culture. We need more documentaries on our artists. We absolutely do. And so, whatever. I mean, that's subjective as well, because people say, no, you crazy? Meek Mill is dope. I don't think so. Maybe it's an age thing. I'm in my late 40s, and I've never been a Meek Mill fan, but I do acknowledge Philadelphia's contribution to hip-hop in the form of Schoolie D, Steady B, EST and 3 Times Dope, Cool C, Hilltop Hustlers, Lawrence Goodman, The Roots. Not all of Roots' stuff, but Black Thought is dope. He's only gotten doper lyrically. I think Questlove is an exceptional drummer, and just as a collective, they're exceptional musicians. So I give Philly their props, absolutely, but not Meek Mill. Should Michael Rapaport have said that he's trash? That's subjective. From the time I was a kid into my teens and onward, that's how we spoke about the culture. You don't really hear rock fans, well, I'm sure they do it too, Or maybe I don't know if country fans do that. I don't know if country fans are as critical of the music, but it just brings to mind this idea that if you're not part of the creators of a genre of music, so if you're not Black or Latino and not American, you can't speak on it. So I'm wondering, I guess that with that mentality, because I don't think that mentality exists anywhere in any other genre of music, because I enjoy country music. Not all of country music, but there's some really good country music out there. There are some rock songs. I grew up listening to rock in the 70s and 80s. There's some really good rock that has come out over the years. I like some folk music. I like some folky stuff. I like... there's jazz music I enjoy. I'm across the board when it comes to music. So does the same thing apply? Does it mean that, well, he's from Canada? He may be black, he's from Canada. We know that jazz is a black art form, but what happens with rock now? We started rock, but this manifestation of rock that came about in later years after, the Chubby Checkers and the classic rock artists, that came about in the 50s and 60s. What happens then? So does it mean that we can't speak on that because I can't speak on it because I'm from Canada, born in Canada? That I can only talk about because I found it in Jamaica as well. I've heard certain personalities in the entertainment space say that they refer to it as the off-island opinion. So if your opinion is not in Jamaica, so if you're not based in Jamaica, or if you're not situated in Jamaica, then you can't. Then your opinion is somehow not as impactful, not as meaningful. It's just a lot of garbage. People creating these divisions. I can't support it, but. What are we going to do? It is what it is, and people are going to continue to speak out. They're going to continue to have their opinions as it relates to how critical we are or how in-depth we get in our opinion on a particular genre or artist within a genre. Well, then it becomes subjective then. People decide whether or not what you're saying is real. I'm very informed about music in general. I know a ton about hip-hop. I know a ton about reggae music. I know a lot about rock music. And pop music, because I grew up with these genres over the last 4+ decades. But, for someone to question whether or not I know what I'm talking about on the basis of where I was born or what race I am, it's not really a race thing, unless we're talking about being a white person commenting on hip-hop music or rap music. But I think it might be a race thing when we start talking about me commenting on country music. Because country music, we had Charlie Pride back in like the 70s. But for the most part, you had Darius Rucker, who came from Hootie and the Blowfish and started making country as well. But there are not a lot of black country artists, male or female. The rock space, obviously we started rock, and then it turned into heavy metal and all other representations of the music or the genre. But I don't know. This whole culture-vulture thing, people are allowed to say whatever they want to say. I can't relate to it. And I'm sure that they would brand me a certain way too. Oh, you're not from America. What do you know? Well, Meek Mill, I know a whole lot more than you do. I've been listening to hip-hop before you were born. Out of Philly. Meek Mill's, 30, in his early 30s? Something like that? Dude, I've been listening to hip-hop 40 years now. So, but what can we do? It makes for a good conversation because I think it's kind of ridiculous, but such is life.